Have you ever sat in your living room, quiet all around you, maybe a cup of coffee in your hands, and felt that ache in your chest when your mind wanders to your child who no longer calls? Maybe it's been months, maybe years. You've tried reaching out, a letter, a voicemail, maybe even standing at their doorstep once or twice, only to feel like a stranger. And it hurts, deeply. Not just because of what's missing, but because it's your own child, your blood. If that feels familiar, please know you're not alone. I'm not here to tell you that it's easy or that there's a quick fix. But I want to talk with you today, heart to heart, about what might be going on and what you can do about it. Because even though the pain feels unbearable at times, there is still hope. Not false hope, but the kind that grows when we begin to understand, to heal, and to change the only thing we can, ourselves. Now, you might be thinking, but I did my best. I made sacrifices. I gave them everything I could. And that might all be true. That's what makes this so confusing, isn't it? So unfair, even. But estrangement doesn't happen out of nowhere. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person or a bad parent. What it does mean is that somewhere along the line, pain and misunderstanding crept in, and it never got properly addressed. You see, in many of the stories I've heard, and in my own experiences, estrangement often begins in very small ways. A harsh word during a difficult conversation, an unmet need that was never voiced clearly, a pattern of reacting instead of listening. These things build over time like layers of dust on a shelf. You don't notice the damage until one day the weight of it causes something to fall. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: even if we weren't the ones to walk away, we may have still played a part in why the distance exists. That doesn't mean blaming ourselves for everything. Not at all. But it does mean taking an honest look at where we may have misunderstood, dismissed, or failed to truly listen. That takes courage, and it's the first step toward healing. I remember a woman I once spoke with. Let's call her Carol. She hadn't seen her son in 7 years. They used to be close, but things fell apart after his marriage. She didn't like his wife. Thought she was controlling, too opinionated. They had a few explosive arguments, and eventually he stopped calling. Carol used to tell herself, "He changed. She took him away." But the more we talked, the more she realized she had made no effort to understand his choice. She'd never asked how he felt, only told him how she felt. And she always assumed he knew how much she loved him, even when her words said otherwise. That realization didn't erase the pain, but it opened a door. So if you're sitting there today wondering what to do, maybe it starts with a question. What would happen if, just for a moment, you stopped looking outward? At the silence, the phone that doesn't ring, the daughter or son who feels so far, and instead looked inward? I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. Looking back at old patterns, especially when we're older, feels like rereading a book we thought we already understood. But sometimes we find pages we skipped. Sometimes we realize we were so busy surviving, providing, disciplining, doing what we thought was best, that we missed moments to connect more gently, more openly. You may be thinking, but I had it so much harder than them. They don't understand what I went through. And you're probably right. Your generation carried weight. This younger generation might never understand. You worked 2, 3 jobs. You did what had to be done. But here's the thing. Your pain doesn't cancel out theirs. Both can exist. And if we want to mend the relationship, we have to create room for both stories to be heard, without rushing to defend ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean throwing yourself at their feet, begging or pleading endlessly. It doesn't mean accepting abuse or being treated cruelly. Boundaries are important. But healing often begins when one person, just one, has the strength to say, "I want to understand. I want to know what you needed from me that I didn't give. That sentence can change everything. It may not lead to a reunion overnight. It may not bring your child running back into your arms, but it plants a seed. And with patience, consistency, and love that isn't wrapped in guilt or expectation, that seed can grow. Another story comes to mind, a gentleman named Howard. He hadn't spoken to his daughter in over a decade. The anger between them had built up like a wall. Every time he reached out, it was with a tone of bitterness. "You've turned your back on me. After all I've done," he'd say in voicemails. She never responded. But one day, instead of a voicemail, he wrote a short letter. And all it said was, "I don't know how I hurt you, but if I did, I'm sorry. I'm ready to listen when you're ready to talk." 6 months later, she called. And here's why that worked. Because Howard stopped trying to be right and started trying to understand. He stopped demanding love and instead began offering safety. And that, my friend, is what this journey is really about. Creating a safe space where your child, who is now an adult, can return without fear of blame, guilt, or emotional debt. You might be wondering what to say. How do you reach out in a way that doesn't push them further away? Well, the key is sincerity, not strategy. Say what's true, not dramatic, not manipulative, just honest. A simple note, even just a few lines. "I know we haven't spoken in a while. I miss you. I'd love the chance to hear how you're doing. If and when you feel ready, I'm here." And then you wait. Not in silence and pain, but in growth. You begin the process of becoming the person you wish your child would return to. Someone calm, open, humble. Someone who's done the work to reflect, to soften, to heal. Because estrangement, as painful as it is, also offers a gift. It shows us where our wounds are. And with time, it shows us how to grow into someone stronger, wiser, and more loving than we ever thought possible. Let's pause here. Just take a breath. Let these thoughts settle in. You've already taken the bravest step by simply listening. Now, if you're still here with me, I want you to know how deeply that matters. It takes courage to sit with hard truths, to look inward when your heart already feels heavy. But the fact that you're listening, reflecting, that tells me you care. And that's something worth building on. Let's talk a bit more about what happens when you begin to shift the focus away from what your child is doing or not doing, and toward how you show up, how you've learned, and what you're willing to take responsibility for now, not years ago, but today. This shift can feel unnatural at first. You might find your mind drifting back to the ways they've hurt you, or how unfair the whole situation feels. That's okay. It's natural. But try to gently guide your thoughts back to what you can influence, the way you respond, the way you reach out, and the way you love, even if that love has to exist at a distance for now. One of the biggest obstacles I see in parents who are estranged from their children is this quiet but powerful belief: I've already done everything I could, and maybe you have. But here's a question worth asking. Have you done everything you know how to do? Or have you done everything you were taught to do? You see, many of us were never taught how to have deep emotional conversations. We were taught how to work hard, how to provide, how to discipline, but not necessarily how to sit with someone's pain and say, "Tell me more." We weren't taught to listen without needing to correct, to validate without defending. So when our children bring up something that hurt them, maybe a moment we don't even remember, we get defensive. We say, "That's not how it happened," or "You're too sensitive." And in doing so, even if we don't mean to, we close the door again. Let me share another story. This one from a man named Richard. He told me how his adult son once said, "Dad, you never listened to me." And Richard, in that moment, snapped back, "I listened to you every day under my roof. I gave you everything. His voice cracked as he told me this, because right after he said those words, his son walked out and didn't come back. Later, when Richard reflected, he realized that, yes, he had listened to the surface-level stuff. He asked about grades, about chores, about plans, but he never asked how his son felt, never made space for emotion. And so, even though he was physically present, emotionally, he'd been a ghost. That's the kind of honesty that turns things around. So if your child has said something that hurt you, or even if they've said nothing at all, ask yourself, what might they have needed from me that I didn't know how to give? And more importantly, can I begin learning how to give that now? This leads us to one of the most healing steps on this journey, learning new emotional tools. Don't let the word tools scare you. This isn't about therapy jargon or complex psychology. It's about simple, practical changes in the way you talk and listen. For example, when your child shares something painful, maybe how they felt growing up or why they pulled away, the instinct is to explain or justify. Instead, what would happen if you simply said, "I didn't know you felt that way. Thank you for telling me." That one sentence can disarm years of built-up tension. It creates safety. And when someone feels safe, they open up. Another tool is learning how to regulate your own emotions. This might sound like a fancy phrase, but it simply means calming yourself down before reacting. When you receive a hurtful message or feel rejected, take a breath. Maybe step outside. Remind yourself, reacting in anger or defensiveness might feel good in the moment, but it often pushes reconciliation further away. Sometimes healing doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it begins when you don't send that heated text, when you choose patience over urgency, when you decide to respond from your wiser self, not your wounded self. And this brings us to something else that's so important, building connection, even when it feels like you've lost the right to. You may not be able to hug your child right now or hear their voice, but connection can still happen in subtle ways. Maybe it's through writing a letter, not one that demands anything, but one that shares a memory. A moment of joy or laughter you once shared. No expectations, just something real, something human. Even if they don't reply, those little gestures can plant seeds. And if you keep showing up in quiet, loving ways, they may eventually begin to trust the new version of you. The version who isn't stuck in old patterns, but who is willing to grow. Now, I know this might all feel overwhelming. You might be asking, where do I even begin? That's the beauty of it. You begin right where you are. You don't need to fix everything today. You don't need the perfect words. What matters most is your intention and your willingness to keep showing up, even when it's hard. That's something I deeply admire in older adults. Resilience. You've been through so much. You've weathered storms that younger generations can't even imagine. But this is a different kind of storm. One that asks for softness instead of strength. One that asks you to trade pride for presence. And that can feel just as courageous. If you've made mistakes, and we all have, it's never too late to say, "I'm still learning." In fact, that humility may be the very thing that inspires your child to believe reconciliation is possible. Because when you show that you're still open to growth, you give them permission to grow too. You model what healing looks like. And that, my friend, is the kind of legacy that outlives pain. So if today you're sitting with sadness, maybe even shame, just know this: you are not broken. You are not beyond hope. You are simply in a chapter of life that calls for a deeper kind of love. A love that listens, that waits, that learns. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of love is the bridge that leads your child back to you. Let's keep walking across it. You've already taken some of the most courageous steps simply by listening, reflecting, and choosing to love differently. Now let's talk about how to gently keep that flame of hope alive, even on the days when it feels like the distance is too wide to cross. One of the most powerful ways to do this is by honoring your own well-being. When you're stressed, lonely, or overwhelmed, it's easy to slip back into old patterns of frustration or self-criticism. So every day, even if it's just for 10 minutes, find something that lifts your spirit. Maybe that's tending a small garden, reading a poem that's meant something to you for years, or simply listening to a favorite song that reminds you of brighter times. These moments of self-care aren't indulgent, they're essential. They help you stay grounded in compassion, both for yourself and for the child you long to reconnect with. And when you care for yourself, you model a healthy form of love. You show, silently but profoundly, that relationships thrive when each person values their own heart. Your child, whether they admit it or not, pays attention to the little ways you choose gentleness over guilt. Over time, those small choices add up, creating an atmosphere where reconciliation can quietly grow. Alongside self-care, another gentle shift you might consider is embracing realistic expectations. It's natural to want a full, warm reunion, the kind you see in movies. But real life often unfolds more slowly. Maybe your first sign of thawing is a 2-sentence email. Maybe it's a like on a social media post you wrote. Celebrate those small openings. Each one marks progress. If you find yourself yearning for more, pause and give yourself permission to feel that longing without judgment. Feelings are messengers, not commands. You can hold them tenderly while still choosing to act with calm determination. If you can, look around for support. Talking with someone who understands estrangement, perhaps a trusted friend, a support group, or even gentle counseling, can help you process the roller coaster of emotions that comes with this journey. Hearing another's story of reconnection can spark fresh ideas for your own path, and sharing your experiences can ease the ache of isolation. You don't have to navigate this alone, and there is strength in knowing others have faced similar struggles and found light on the other side. Now, as you take these steps, caring for yourself, nurturing hope in small ways, seeking support, you may wonder how to hold the space for both acceptance and possibility. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means acknowledging what is real today without surrendering to despair. Possibility means tending the spark of hope that one day, when the timing is right, your child might reach back to you. That spark lives in the kindness of your words, in the calm of your presence, and in your willingness to keep growing, no matter how long it takes. Perhaps right now, you're still feeling the sting of old wounds. Maybe memories of arguments or disappointments come rushing back. When that happens, breathe into the ache. Remind yourself that you're human, and humans are beautifully imperfect. Imperfection is the soil in which empathy grows. As you learn to extend empathy to yourself for the mistakes you've made, you'll find it easier to extend genuine empathy to your child too. That empathy may be the very quality that helps them feel safe enough to cross the distance. And if a moment ever comes when you do receive a message or a visit, remember to lean into curiosity rather than caution. It can feel tempting to watch their every word for hidden meaning or to prepare a defense in case of hurt. Instead, try asking open-hearted questions. I'm so glad to hear from you. How have you been? Let them guide the conversation at first. This simple act of putting their story first can speak volumes about how you've changed and how deeply you care about their experience. By now, you've likely gathered that estrangement isn't a problem to be solved in a day. It's a tender process of unlearning old habits, learning new ways of relating, and showing up again and again, even when progress is slow. If you find yourself discouraged, take a moment to look back and acknowledge how far you've come, how many times you've chosen compassion over resentment, growth over blame. Those choices matter. They ripple outward in ways you might never fully see, but they matter. Before we wrap up, I want to share one final thought. The journey of healing a parent-child relationship can transform you in ways you never imagined. Even if reconciliation with your own child remains partial or distant, every step you take toward vulnerability, empathy, and responsibility enriches the rest of your relationships, friendships, community, even relationships with grandchildren or nieces and nephews. You become a living example of how love can evolve, how hope can endure, and how wisdom can bloom in the face of heartbreak. If you've been moved by this conversation, I invite you to share your own experiences or questions in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you found encouragement here, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing so we can continue this journey together. There's a whole community of hearts here, cheering you on, learning alongside you, and believing in the possibility of renewed connection. Thank you for letting me speak with you so openly. Remember, you are not alone, and healing doesn't follow a straight line. Don't underestimate it. At this point in our conversation, I want to gently revisit something that may have been whispering to you all along. That small, persistent question, can this really change? The answer is yes, but not the kind of yes we hear in fairy tales, where one apology makes everything whole. It's the kind of yes that takes time, that begins slowly, sometimes invisibly, that builds not through grand gestures, but through steady, imperfect steps. You see, reconciliation isn't a finish line, it's a relationship. And like any meaningful relationship, it needs nurturing, patience, and space to breathe. Sometimes it may feel like your efforts go unnoticed. Sometimes it may feel like your child has hardened their heart forever. But even if that's how it seems on the surface, change is still possible. People shift. Pain softens. Time, when coupled with love and responsibility, has a way of opening doors we once thought were sealed shut. I say this not from blind hope, but from stories I've witnessed and from lives I've walked beside. I've seen parents who thought all was lost receive a birthday card years later. I've seen adult children who once cut ties sit down for coffee, cautiously, but with open eyes. I've seen reconciliation born out of quiet resilience, moments where one person decided to stop defending the past and instead say, "I'm here now, and I want to try." But what happens if your child doesn't respond? If silence continues? That's one of the hardest truths to sit with. And yet, your healing doesn't have to stop. In fact, it shouldn't stop. Because even if your child can't or won't meet you in this moment, you can still give yourself what maybe neither of you ever received enough of: compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. You can be the parent to yourself that you always needed. You can reparent the younger version of you that didn't know what you know now. You can stand beside the person you've become and say, "I'm proud of the work I've done. I'm proud of the heart I'm growing." That's the foundation of peace, not external outcomes, but the inner alignment that comes from knowing you've taken the steps to make things right with humility and love. If your child returns, you'll be ready. And if they don't, you'll still be whole. Sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave our children isn't a restored relationship. Sometimes it's the quiet evidence that change is possible, that love can evolve, that pain can be transformed, not into bitterness, but into wisdom. Let me offer a gentle reminder here. Your worth as a parent isn't defined by whether your child returns your calls. It's not defined by holiday dinners or whether they show up on your birthday. It's defined by how you've loved, how you've grown, how you've faced your reflection and said, "Even with my flaws, I will keep showing up." So if today still feels heavy, be kind to yourself. Breathe, rest, go outside and feel the wind on your face. Call someone who does answer. Write in a journal. Let the tears fall if they need to. All of that is part of the healing. None of it is wasted. And if, someday, your child knocks on your door or writes you a letter or sends a simple text, I hope you'll meet them with presence, Not with the weight of guilt or explanation, but with the strength of someone who's been doing the work, who's built a life of meaning, even in the absence, who's prepared to listen, not to reply, not to correct, but to hear fully. Because in the end, healing is about more than restoring what was lost. It's about creating something new, something built on truth, mutual respect, and the grace to begin again. And whether that happens with your child or simply within your own soul, both are victories. I want to thank you for being here, for allowing me to speak into this tender space, for letting yourself feel, reflect, and hope. If something I said touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this video brought you any comfort or insight, I hope you'll consider liking it or subscribing. That small gesture helps others find this message too. Others who may be sitting in silence, wondering if anyone understands. And please, share this with someone who may be walking a similar path. Sometimes the right words, spoken in the right way, can be the first light in a dark season. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are still a parent, still a soul capable of immense healing and deep love. Here's to choosing that love again and again, even when it's hard. Here's to the peace you deserve, the wholeness you're building, and the relationships, past, present, and future, that can be reshaped by your courage. You've done beautifully. Keep going. And until next time, take good care of your heart.